Hi, I'm Melina, and at my sister's graduation, while she stood smiling in her cap and gown, my mom dragged me on stage with a violin I hadn't touched in years. She leaned in, smirking, and whispered, "Let them see what failure sounds like." They all expected me to break, to choke, to confirm I was the shame of the family. But what came out of that violin left every student, teacher, and parent frozen. You ever wonder what happens when the discarded child finally makes a sound the world can't ignore? Let's find out. Before we dive in, tell us, where are you watching from, and have you ever been silenced by your own family? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your story. I woke up to the faint sound of laughter coming through the wall. Romy's voice, high, excited, bounced off the paper-thin drywall, followed by our mother's syrupy cooing. I turned my head slowly, eyes squinting at the soft light filtering through the bent window blinds. The room I was in wasn't mine. Not really. It was the laundry room before Mom cleared out the old machines and tossed in a narrow cot and a wobbly dresser. Now it was my temporary stay, as she liked to call it. I lay still for a moment, listening. Romy's graduation day. That explained the noise, the smell of fresh pancakes, the visitors I could hear milling about the kitchen. A celebration, of course, for the golden girl. I sat up, my bare feet meeting the cold linoleum floor, and took a slow breath. My back ached from the mattress, and my pride, well, that had stopped aching years ago, mostly. At the breakfast table, I tried to blend into the background like usual, a coffee mug in hand, shoulders drawn in. Romy was already in full makeup, her graduation cap perched jauntily on her head. She was glowing, loud, and magnetic, just the way Mom liked her. Without looking at me, Mom clinked her fork against her glass. "Everyone, quick announcement," she chirped. "My Melina here." She gestured toward me with the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "We'll be playing violin today during the ceremony. A tribute. For Romy." The room went silent. My hand froze halfway to my mouth. I blinked. What? I said, voice low. Romy snorted. "You still have that thing?" "I haven't played since—" "It's the least you could do," Mom cut in, voice suddenly sharp. "After all this family's done for you." I stared at her, the heat rushing to my cheeks. There was no discussion, no request, just a demand dressed up as a gift. Her tone softened, mockingly. "Come on, honey, let them see what a failure sounds like. It might be your last standing ovation." The guests chuckled uneasily. Romy smirked. I set the mug down. My palms were damp. I hadn't touched the violin in 15 years. Not since he died. I was 16 when Dad collapsed on the driveway. One moment he was humming in the garage, tuning my violin's bridge. The next I was standing at his bedside, a nurse muttering something I never wanted to understand. After he passed, I stopped playing. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just put the instrument back in its case and carried it to the attic. When Mom found me there hours later, she didn't say, "It's okay to stop." She said, "Music won't feed anyone. You're not Romy." I became the leftover. Now, as I rode in the passenger seat to Romy's graduation, the violin, dusty, scarred, still in its cracked case, rested on my lap. My fingers itched with something I couldn't name. Fear? Shame? Rage? Probably all of it. The school auditorium loomed ahead, buzzing with chatter, the pride of parents thick in the air. Backstage, a coordinator rushed over, barely glancing at me before whispering into a mic, "Special performance, Melina Grant, sister of valedictorian Romy Grant." Mom nudged me forward. "Smile," she hissed. I walked onto the stage in jeans and a blouse that hadn't fit right since before my injury. My shoes squeaked, the lights blinded. The auditorium was full. Students, teachers, Romy's in-laws-to-be. I caught her eyes in the front row. She mouthed it, slow and cruel. "Try not to suck." The MC cleared his throat. "A musical piece in honor of Romy Grant." Scattered claps, a few polite coughs. I stood center stage, pulling the violin from its case. The strings were old. The bow was fraying. My hands trembled as I raised it to my chin. The first note was flat. I winced. Someone chuckled near the back. Mom's face was frozen in that polite smile that meant, "You better not humiliate me." But I didn't play the piece she expected. I didn't pull out the standard graduation tune she'd suggested last night. I played his piece. It was the one Dad composed just for me when I was 12 and terrified to audition. A strange, raw little solo that meandered like the creek behind our old house. The notes came hesitant at first, fragile, broken, but then something inside me clicked. Not confidence, not pride, just something that had waited too long to be seen. The air changed. I could feel it. The laughter stopped. The whispers stilled. I kept going. The music turned haunting, familiar, personal. The auditorium faded. It was just me and the violin and a room full of silence heavy with listening. A tear slipped down my cheek, but I didn't stop. My fingers remembered where to go, not because I practiced, but because my body had never forgotten, and when I played the last note, it didn't echo. It settled. There was nothing for a moment. Then a chair scraped, a teacher stood, then another. Clapping began, hesitant at first, then building. I didn't look at Romy. I didn't need to. I saw Mom's face, though, stone cold, jaw clenched. I held onto the violin and walked off stage before anyone could speak to me, before anyone could ruin what had just come alive again inside me. And as I stepped behind the curtain, I had no idea the principal would follow me backstage and tell me what he'd just overheard. I didn't look back when I stepped off stage. I didn't need to. The applause still echoed faintly as I moved past the heavy side curtain and into the dim backstage hallway, the air stale with dust and disuse. My hands clung to the violin, not with pride, but with a desperation I hadn't felt since childhood. My legs kept moving, even though my chest tightened with every breath. I didn't know if I was going to cry or be sick. Maybe both. I ducked behind one of the thick velvet panels, found a quiet corner near a stack of old chairs, and crouched down. Just out of view. Just how they liked me. My fingers still trembled, the bow loose in my lap. The performance was over, but the silence that followed, that part was louder than the applause. Then I heard the voice. "You just changed the mood of this whole ceremony." I turned, startled. Principal Sandler stood a few feet away, his suit slightly rumpled, hands folded. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes were steady. Kind. It caught me off guard. He took a few steps closer. "You okay?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I just nodded. He glanced over his shoulder, then back at me. "I'm not supposed to say this, but I overheard your mother backstage." My stomach dropped. "She said you were just here to get laughed at, that it would be a funny little family moment." Her words. I looked down at the violin. "But when you started playing," he continued, "the room changed. The students stopped whispering, even the faculty sat up. They didn't hear a joke, Melina. They heard heartbreak." He said it like a fact. Not a compliment, not pity, just truth. My throat felt tight. "Why are you telling me this?" He crouched slightly so he was more at my eye level. "Because the school board cut 5 minutes from Romy's speech to make time for you. They thought this was a tribute. They didn't know it was a setup." I blinked. "Wait, the board asked for me?" He nodded. "It was mentioned in the planning notes your mom submitted. Melina Grant will perform in tribute to the graduating class." "So, we assumed it was something special." Something twisted inside me, a mix of rage and disbelief. My mother had used their words, their assumption, and turned it into a public trap, all while pretending I was being honored. "She played you," he said gently, as if reading my thoughts. "But it didn't go the way she planned." He straightened up and adjusted his blazer. "There's a benefit next month. Alumni, faculty, donors. I'm submitting your name to perform, if you're willing." I stared at him. "You want me to play again? You reminded us that art's not always polished. Sometimes it's raw. That's the kind that sticks." He left before I could answer. I sat there a little longer, the hum of the crowd outside fading. I didn't know what stunned me more, that I had played, or that someone had finally seen me. It wasn't my family. It never had been. It was almost dark by the time we got home. The car ride was silent. Mom didn't speak. Romy scrolled through her phone, making little sounds of annoyance or boredom, like the whole day had been some mild inconvenience. Once we stepped inside, Mom kicked off her heels and dropped her bag on the kitchen counter. "Well," she muttered, opening the fridge, "that was dramatic." Romy plopped onto the couch. "The violin thing? It was fine. People clapped because they felt bad." She looked at me like she was handing out a favor. "I let you have your moment. You're welcome." I didn't respond. Mom took a swig from her iced tea. "Let's not get big-headed, Melina. You're still the family burden. A standing ovation won't fix that." She didn't even glance at me when she said it. I quietly took off my flats, carried the violin case upstairs to the guest room I'd been sleeping in. I set it gently on the bed and sat beside it. A few minutes later, curiosity got the better of me. I checked Romy's Instagram. She'd posted a story, just a short clip of me on stage, captioned, "Gave my sister a pity performance slot. For family first." But the tags were already coming in, comments from classmates I barely knew. "Your sis was amazing. That song gave me chills. Didn't know she played. Dang." A few hours later, the post was gone. She never mentioned why, but I saw the twitch in her jaw at dinner when Uncle Dennis texted me to say congratulations. I didn't say anything. Not yet. But something had cracked. The careful silence I'd kept all these years, it wasn't holding the same way anymore. Later that night, as I folded laundry in my room, my mind drifted to a memory, one that hadn't surfaced in years. I was 12. In a scratchy blue dress, standing on the creaky stage of my middle school auditorium. My father sat in the front row, one hand gripping the program, the other wiping at his cheek as I played. He wasn't a man who cried, but that day when I hit the final note, he stood before anyone else. His clapping was loud and awkward. I still remember the way he whispered to me as I walked off stage, "One day, they'll hear you." At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. But now I did. The next morning, a cream-colored envelope arrived. My name was on it in neat script. Inside, an official invitation from Principal Sandler. "You are cordially invited to perform at the 20th Annual Crescent Valley Alumni Benefit." I didn't tell anyone. I folded it up and slid it under my mattress. But nothing in this house stayed hidden for long. That night, Romy barged into my room looking for her straightener. She rummaged through drawers without asking, muttering about how I was always hiding her stuff. Then she spotted the edge of the envelope peeking out. She pulled it free, read it once, then again. Her lips twisted into that sharp little smirk she wore when she thought she'd won. "You think you're getting another moment?" she said. She held the invitation up like it was a joke, or worse, an offense. I didn't answer. I just looked at her, really looked. And for the first time in years, I didn't blink. By the time Romy closed my bedroom door with that smug little smirk, the house had already settled into a silence I knew too well, like everything loud had been wrung out of it. I stayed seated on the edge of my bed, the paper invitation still warm from where it had rested under my pillow. She didn't know. She didn't know that while she was sipping overpriced cocktails with her new circle of designer friends at her graduation dinner, I'd been on the phone in the dark, knees pulled up to my chest, whispering into the receiver like I was telling a secret to the night itself. "Ms. Eris?" I'd said. "I don't know if you remember me." There was a pause, and then, her voice, warm and cracked like old wood. "Of course I do. I never forgot the girl whose sadness showed in every note." My breath had caught. "I want to try again," I whispered. "Is there still a chance for an audition?" Another pause. Then, "It's not about chances, Melina. It's about whether you still wanted enough to bleed for it." Bleed for it? She'd meant it literally. I knew that, because once, years ago, I had. That summer before my junior year, I'd been accepted into a prestigious conservatory's summer session. A week later, my mother sat me down and said flatly, "We just can't make it work, Melina. You know things are tight." And I believed her, right up until Romy came home with a brand new smile, veneers, full set, and a caption that read, "Confidence starts with the perfect teeth." I found out later that Ms. Eris had written me a recommendation letter. I only found it by accident, tucked into the bottom of a drawer of old choir robes at school, never sent. I didn't cry, I just stopped playing. Until now. That night, still on the phone, I asked Ms. Eris, "Would you help me again?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said, "but this time, you send the letter, you show up, you own it." We ended the call, and I sat there for a long time staring at the phone screen. Then I got up and went to the garage. It hadn't changed much. Same cracked cement floor, same pegboard where Dad used to hang his tools, same old lawn chairs stacked in the corner. But the violin case was there, under a dusty sheet, behind the Christmas boxes. I lifted it like it was something holy. The bow still had my dad's initials scratched into the handle. The rosin was cracked, but usable. I rosined the bow, tightened the hair, and held the violin to my chin. It felt like standing on a cliff. Then I played. Not beautifully, not perfectly, but honestly. The strings stung at first, biting into my fingers like they remembered every year I'd neglected them. My shoulder ached, my elbows popped, but I didn't stop, and I kept going. Every night. While Romy watched shows downstairs on full blast, I played under the hum of the porch light and the grinding of the old freezer. Sometimes the neighbor's dog would bark. Sometimes a lawnmower started next door and gave me cover. One night, Romy passed through the garage. She didn't say anything, just gave me that smile, the one she used when she was 5 and pulled the head off my favorite Barbie. The next day, Mom popped her head in. "I hope you're not wasting electricity chasing pipe dreams," she said, tapping the doorframe with her knuckle. "College applications are over, and music won't pay bills." I didn't answer. I just tightened my bow. The following morning, the porch light started flickering. At first, I thought it was bad wiring. But then I realized it only flickered when I played, as if someone, or something, was listening. By the end of the week, my calluses were back. The ones I thought I'd lost forever. I played scales until my wrists ached, then ran through Vivaldi, Bach, even a broken-down Debussy I remembered from high school. Saturday night we had dinner together, if you could call it that. Romy was glowing as usual, scrolling through her phone, legs crossed like she was on a talk show set. Mom was beaming. "Romy's getting nominated for Young Woman of the Year in the Oakbridge Times," she announced, scooping mashed potatoes like it was a coronation. "She's everything this family should be proud of." Then she looked at me. "Not long, just enough. Some of us are just background noise." I set down my fork slowly, wiped my mouth and looked her square in the eye. "Not for long." Silence. Then laughter. Not loud. Just that kind of breathy, mean laughter that doesn't need volume to sting. They went back to eating. No one noticed the email confirmation already sitting in my inbox. My private audition was scheduled for the following Thursday. I'd booked it the same day Ms. Eris said yes. Later that night, I climbed into the attic to look for my dad's old metronome, the one he used to tap with his knuckles when I dragged tempo. It took a while to find it, but what I did find first was the letter, folded into the lining of his spare violin case, yellowed but neat. It wasn't addressed to me. It didn't have to be. "If you find this," it began, "it means you didn't give up." My throat tightened. They never saw you, but I did. Always. No signature, just the date, 6 months before his death. I sat back against a wooden beam, legs stretched out, letter in my lap. Then, quietly, I folded it again and slid it into the pocket of my coat, because I knew what was coming, and for the first time in years, I wanted it. By the time the Uber dropped me off in front of the conservatory, my palms were already sweating through the coat sleeves. I'd been replaying Ms. Eris's last words all night, "Prove it." I hadn't told anyone where I was going, not even Carmen. I just said I was meeting someone for a music thing. The conservatory loomed like a cathedral, marble steps, vaulted glass skylights, the kind of building where sound must echo with purpose. My fingers tightened around the violin case. For a second, I thought about turning around and calling a cab, but then I reached into my pocket and touched the letter from Dad, the one I'd folded so carefully the night before. I pushed the door open. The polished floors reflected everything: me, this moment, the weight I was dragging behind me. A receptionist nodded toward the east wing without asking my name. At the end of the hallway, a tall man in a dark blazer stood by the arched window, hands clasped behind him like he'd been waiting there forever. When he turned, his eyes flicked to the violin case, then back to my face. "You must be Marvin's daughter." My breath caught in my chest. I hadn't told anyone his name. Not here, not in the email, not on the phone. I barely managed a whisper. "Yes, sir." He stepped forward, extending a hand, and gave a small, almost sad smile. "I'm Callan. Your father and we talked about building a youth mentorship program right before, well," he didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't have to. The air between us filled in the gap with years of what-ifs. "I remember you," he added quietly. "You were the little girl who played in the corner pew during rehearsals, clutching that tiny violin like it was a secret." I swallowed and nodded. "He taught me everything." Callan tilted his head. "Do you still play with truth?" I blinked. No one had ever asked me that before. Not what I played, not how well, just if I played with truth. "Yes," I said, and for the first time in a long while, I meant it without hesitation. He gestured toward the small studio to the side. "Then let's hear it." I walked in, the floorboards creaking softly under my steps. The room was modest. Just a piano, a single chair, and a tall stand for sheet music. I didn't need the stand. I opened the case, lifted my violin, and ran the bow lightly across the strings to test the tuning. My hands trembled. My fingertips still bore faint scabs from last week's hidden practices in the garage, but I didn't flinch. I took a breath. Then I played. It wasn't perfect, not at first. My bow arm wavered. I missed a shift in the second phrase, but somewhere between the fourth measure and the bridge, I stopped trying to be flawless and just felt. I let the melody unfold. I played the same piece Dad had taught me the night we hid in the back room during that storm, the one I had dared to play at Romy's graduation. This time, I played it for him. When I finished, the silence stretched long. Callan didn't clap. He didn't smile. He just looked at me like I'd said something sacred, and he needed a second to absorb it. "You're not like the others," he finally said. "You don't chase the stage. You carry it." I didn't move. I didn't know if that was good or bad. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folder. "This isn't a full offer, not yet, but we have a mentorship program, one-on-one, off the books, intensive. We see if it fits you, and you see if this life still fits you." I exhaled, like I hadn't been breathing for the last 10 minutes. "I'd be honored," I said quietly. When I got home, it was just past 6. The house smelled like reheated pasta and cheap garlic bread. Romy's laughter came from the living room, some reality show droning in the background. I slipped the conservatory folder into the back of my laundry basket, then shoved it to the bottom of my closet. For once, I felt like I was protecting something mine, not hiding in fear, but guarding something I'd earned. The next afternoon, while I was out helping at the library, Romy must have snooped. I caught it in the way her door creaked too slowly that night, like she'd been waiting to see if I'd come storming in. I didn't. But at dinner, Mom was already halfway through her second glass of boxed wine when she struck. "So," she said casually, stabbing a meatball, "I hear someone's been sneaking around behind our backs, planning big things, conservatory-level things." Romy looked smug, swirling her water like it was champagne. "I thought you were finally learning humility," Mom went on, her voice sharpening. "But now you think you're better than the rest of us?" I didn't flinch. I looked her straight in the eye. "I've never been part of your us." The room went still. Then Romy snorted. "You really think playing that violin makes you special?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I just picked up my plate and carried it to the sink. That night, as I folded clothes in my room, I didn't hear the ping from Romy's phone in the hallway. Didn't see her lean in close to the screen, biting her lip as she typed. Didn't know she'd found the press contact in the conservatory's mentorship brochure. Didn't know she sent an email saying I'd forged my father's name to get a pity offer. I didn't know. But someone else did, and by the time I walked into the next lesson, Maestro Colin already had the email open on his desk. So when I walked into the next lesson, Maestro looked at me differently. He was already standing at the far end of the mentoring room, arms crossed, a manila folder resting on the piano beside him. The smile he usually greeted me with wasn't there. Instead, his expression was unreadable, somewhere between guarded and disappointed. "Melina," he said evenly, "we need to talk first." I stopped mid-step. The air inside the room felt tighter than usual, like something sacred had been disturbed. I clutched the strap of my violin case, heart pacing ahead of me. Maestro picked up a folded piece of paper and handed it to me. "This was sent to the conservatory anonymously," he said. "Yesterday." I unfolded it slowly. The subject line alone made my pulse stumble. "Fraudulent legacy claim. Melina Grant." The email didn't bother with pleasantries. It dove straight in. "This student has used a fabricated connection to Marvin Grant to manipulate sympathy and secure mentorship. There's no official documentation tying her achievements to her late father's legacy. Some people will do anything to feel important." But what stopped me cold wasn't the accusation. It was the tone. I'd heard this voice before, just not in print. The phrasing, the smug rhythm, the way it tried to sound casual while driving in the knife, that was Romy. Only Romy ever called my music a sympathy grab. Only Romy said I parade around with that violin like it makes up for being a nobody. It was her voice, clear as day, disguised under cowardice. I looked up at Maestro Colin, whose gaze hadn't wavered. "It's not true," I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. "Everything I submitted, my father's connection, my performance history, it's all real. I didn't ask for pity. I played." He watched me a moment longer. Then he exhaled and gently tapped the top of the piano with his knuckles. "I know," he said softly, "but I needed to hear how you'd respond." He reached into the folder again and pulled out a second envelope, this one old, the edges yellowing, the seal brittle. Inside were handwritten pages, faded but still legible. My father's notes. "This," he said, "is from when we were planning the youth program together, before he passed." I ran my fingers lightly across the paper. His handwriting, his sketches, musical phrases I recognized from the piece I'd played at graduation. "You have his hands, Melina," Maestro said, voice lower now. "But this? This email? It won't be the last attack." I looked up at him. My throat was tight, but not from sadness. I was tired of shrinking into silence every time someone tried to make me doubt what I knew in my bones. "I'm not going to fight it," I said. "I'm going to outplay it." A small smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Good," he said. "That's what your father would have done." That night, I didn't eat with the rest of the family. I sat in my room, door locked, fingers tracing the edges of the conservatory folder I'd stuffed beneath my bed. I'd planned to keep this quiet, just keep my head down, practice, prove myself quietly. But Romy, she couldn't stand not knowing, and now she did. Around 10, I came out to get some water. Romy was at the kitchen counter scrolling her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. When she looked up and saw me, she smirked. "Well," she said, drawing out the word like it tasted sweet. "So? Still chasing your little symphony dream?" I didn't respond. She stood, folded her arms. "You know, it's kind of cute, the way you really think you're going somewhere. But this isn't a movie, Melina. People don't just get discovered because they mope around playing sad little tunes." "You read my file," I said quietly. She tilted her head. "You left it half buried under laundry. What did you expect?" Our mother walked in just then, holding a stack of coupons and muttering about gas prices. She caught the tail end of the exchange and frowned. "What's going on?" she asked. Melina's still pretending she's meant for some stage, Romy answered before I could speak. Still playing the poor prodigy card. Mom rolled her eyes and waved a hand. Enough. Melina, your place is here. You've got a roof over your head. Be grateful. That music thing, it's cute when you're a kid, but you're not 12 anymore. I didn't argue. I just turned, went back to my room and started packing the violin into its hard case, slowly, purposefully. The next morning, while the house was quiet, I sat at my old desk and opened a blank browser tab. No more silence. I created a private blog. Anonymous. No photos of me, no personal backstory. Just one name for the blog. Unwritten strings. I uploaded a short clip from my graduation solo, then another. One of the pieces Maestro had recorded during our sessions, his voice in the background saying, "Yes, right there, hold it." I added small reflections, thoughts about grief, about playing without applause, about truth in sound, no promotions, no hashtags. I just let it sit. But over the next 2 days, views ticked up, comments trickled in. One was from a young violinist in Michigan. "This made me cry. Thank you for not polishing it. It's raw, and I needed that." Another, "I don't know who you are, but don't stop." On the third night, I got an alert. A famous violinist, real deal, Carnegie Hall level, had reposted the clip with a caption that said, "Real music, raw and untaught, but this is soul." The blog exploded. By morning, I had 20 messages from music students across the country asking if I taught, if I would release more. And that afternoon, just before I headed to the conservatory again, an email popped into my inbox. Subject, possible guest recital spot. From Maestro Callan. Nothing promised, but a recital is forming. One guest slot is open. Let me know by end of day if you want it. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back, "I'm in." So when Romy found out, she did something I never expected. She smiled. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a quiet curve of the lips, sharp, deliberate. Like she'd been waiting for me to get my hopes up, waiting for the right moment to cut the strings. That weekend, I got up early and made my way to the old community music hall where the guest recital rehearsal would be held. The place had history, faded brick walls, creaky floors, a stage that smelled like pine and polish. I used to sit in the back row during my dad's practice sessions when I was a kid, swinging my legs and scribbling in his margins. Now I stood on that stage, alone. For now, I opened my violin case and began tuning. The strings hummed softly as I adjusted the pegs, fingers steady. A few young musicians wandered in, nodding at me with small, cautious smiles. Some of them had probably seen my blog, heard my raw practice clips, read my late-night journal entries about fear and failure. They didn't know it was me when it first started, but now, well, the whispers were getting louder. Maestro Callan arrived not long after. He clapped his hands once. "Today, we just feel it. No pressure. You're here because you have something to say through your instrument. Let it speak." I nodded. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't shrinking in the room. I belonged, or at least, I was beginning to. The warmth didn't last long. I was about to step onto the platform for the first run-through when my phone buzzed. Once, then again, and again, and again. At first, I thought it was a reminder or maybe a group message, but then I saw the notifications, screenshots, Instagram tags, links I didn't recognize, my anonymous blog, exposed, the homepage I'd built in the quiet of my bedroom, the videos I'd uploaded, heart-pounding, the late-night post where I wrote, "I'm not anyone's prodigy, I'm just someone who can't stop playing." All of it, now with my real name attached. Someone had twisted it, reframed it as manipulation. I opened one post, my photo pulled from an old school concert. The caption read, "Entitled girl fakes pain for sympathy, uses dad's death to land recital spot. Pathetic." My stomach flipped. I scrolled down. Another comment. "She doesn't even own that violin. Her sister said it was passed down to her. Rich kids stealing legacies, gross." The words sliced through me. But I didn't need to guess. That tone, that phrasing, the smug confidence hiding behind casual cruelty, It was Romy's signature. I blinked hard and stepped out onto the rehearsal stage anyway. The music hall felt heavier now. When I lifted the bow to play, my hands weren't steady. My shoulder was too tight, my grip too rigid. The opening notes cracked like dry wood. By the time I got to the second movement, one of the kids in the back leaned to whisper, not even bothering to lower his voice. "Is that the girl from the Post?" The final note hung in the air, then dropped into silence. No one clapped. No one moved, not even Maestro. I packed my violin slowly, like maybe if I moved deliberately enough, I could hold my dignity together a little longer. Out in the hallway, I checked my voicemail. My mother's voice greeted me, tight, clipped, disappointed. "You see what happens when you act like you're better than the rest of us? You embarrassed yourself. You embarrassed all of us. Come home, and this time, stay there." I stood in the empty corridor for a moment, gripping the phone until the screen dimmed. Then I turned and walked straight out of the building. No goodbye, no apology, no promise to return. I didn't cry on the walk home. I didn't even blink. I just opened the front door, headed upstairs, and sat cross-legged on my bed with the violin case in front of me. I opened it. Nestled in the velvet lining beneath the spare strings and old Roseanne was something I'd almost forgotten. A folded receipt, worn at the edges. It was dated a few months before Dad passed. His name. The luthier's name. The serial number of the instrument. A scribbled note, "To Melina, because you always listened." He'd given it to me, not just loaned it, not just shared. Given. Romy had tried to claim it was hers, tried to paint me as the thief. I stared at the paper a long time. Then I snapped a photo and opened the blog. The last post had been flooded with hateful comments. I added one more entry. Just a single photo of the receipt, and a caption underneath. "He gave it to me, because I never asked to be seen. I just wanted to be heard." That night, I left my bedroom light off. I didn't bother brushing my hair, didn't bother checking how bad the smear under my eyes looked in the reflection of my dark phone screen. I just lay still. Then, right after midnight, a ping, an email. From anonymous subject, "Play anyway." Attached was a video link. I tapped it. It was grainy footage from that morning's rehearsal. Someone in the hall had recorded me, shaking hands and all. It caught the stumbles, the cracked notes, but also the way I kept going, the way I didn't walk off. The video ended on me lowering the violin and blinking through the quiet, and a single caption below, "She messed up, but she got up, and she finished." Within an hour, the view count ticked into the thousands. A comment appeared under it. "That's the kind of failure I'd pay to see again." I didn't know if I'd be invited back, didn't know if any of it mattered anymore. But I watched that video 3 more times, just to remind myself that falling apart didn't mean disappearing. And when Maestro saw that video, he made a decision that changed everything. That night, I barely slept. Not from anxiety, but from something quieter, a kind of hush that settles in your bones after being gutted in front of a room full of strangers and still managing to stand. The world didn't end. I just wasn't sure if I belonged in it anymore. Morning came slowly, spilling golden light across my bedroom floor. I sat on the edge of the bed, violin case still closed at my feet. I hadn't touched it since the night Romy exposed everything. The comments, the silence, Mom's voicemail, it all still echoed. I was packing up the case, not to play, but to store it away, when someone knocked on the front door. 3 knocks. Then silence. I opened it slowly, half expecting another blow, another insult wrapped in pity. But there he stood. Maestro Callan. Windblown hair. No pretense. He held out a folded paper. "They didn't want to give you the seat," he said quietly. But I did. I looked down. My name, Melina Grant, was printed at the bottom of the recital lineup. Final performer. The closer. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out, not even air. His voice broke the silence. "If you say no, I'll understand, but I'm asking you to say yes." I stepped back, letting him in. We sat at the kitchen table. He didn't touch the coffee I offered, just looked at me like I was already on stage. "Why me?" I finally asked. I cracked. I stumbled. I wasn't good. He didn't flinch. You were honest. That video, every missed note, every ounce of courage, it mattered more than perfect scales. I looked away, embarrassed at how raw it all still felt. What if they come just to laugh? Romy's not done. She and my mother, he cut in, voice firm. Let them come. Give them something worth remembering. I didn't answer, but my hand moved to the violin case, brushing its latch. Later that afternoon, I sat alone in the living room, the house quiet except for the soft tick of the old wall clock. My phone lit up, messages, comments, shared posts. That video was still spreading, but something had changed. One comment read, "She looked terrified, but she didn't run." Another, "I wish I had that kind of guts." And then a post from a former student of Maestro's, "If she's performing, I'll be there, front row." I blinked, read it again. Somewhere in that flood of noise, something shifted. Even as I absorbed that glimmer of warmth, a new message appeared from a name I knew all too well. Romy. Can't wait to see how badly you crash in front of a real crowd. Below it, a reply from our mother. She should have known better. Let her learn. I didn't reply. I just set the phone down. I was done arguing with people who only showed up to watch me fall. Instead, I climbed up to the attic. Dad's old journal sat in the cedar chest, wrapped in one of his concert scarves. I hadn't opened it in years. The pages smelled like ink and sawdust and something else I could never name. I flipped through until I found it. An unfinished composition, no title, just bars of music, aching and fragmented. He never finished it. But I could feel where it wanted to go. I sat on the floor, tracing the notes with my finger, humming the tune aloud until my own voice joined his in the silence. And then I wrote the final measure. I called it, Still Here. The day of the recital came without fanfare. I arrived early, slipping in through the side entrance of the Civic Arts Center. The hall was already humming, ushers moving, cellists warming up, an oboe stretching into tune. But what struck me was the crowd. The seats had doubled. People stood in the back. Some even sat on the stairs. And not just friends of performers, faces I'd never seen, locals, students, musicians from neighboring cities. I stayed out of sight. No fanfare, no announcement. In the wings, I tightened my bow, adjusted the bridge, tuned the A string by instinct. My hands didn't shake. My heart did. But it was a steady rhythm, not panic. When the lights dimmed for the final piece, the stagehand motioned to me, and I stepped out. The light washed over me, warm, unwavering. In the second row I spotted them. Romy, arms crossed, Mom beside her, mouth already twisted with judgment. I didn't flinch. I didn't look for their approval. I wasn't playing for them anymore. I closed my eyes, lifted the violin, and began. The opening note hung in the air like a question. Then came the ache, then the fire. I let the bow guide the grief, the betrayal, the silent nights, the hope that cracked but never fully broke. The melody was imperfect. My voice wasn't. Still here. When the last note fell into silence, I lowered the bow slowly, and for a moment, the entire hall held its breath. I lifted the bow just as the hall stilled. No countdown, no cue, just breath, mine, and the weight of every moment that had led to this one. The first note trembled out like it was afraid of being heard. It was almost nothing, a whisper through string and wood, but it was mine. Fragile, imperfect, real. The spotlight burned above, soft and steady, and somewhere near the third row, Romy sat with our mother, arms folded, waiting, expecting the fall. They didn't know I'd already fallen, and climbed back. The piece wasn't flashy, it wasn't meant to impress. It had no grand flourishes, no crescendos for applause. It carried hesitation, grief, but also something else. Resistance. I didn't hide my nerves. I let the bow shake slightly, let the notes come out raw. I wasn't playing for anyone's approval. I was simply telling the truth, note by note. Phones went dark, coughs stopped, and someone in the back let out a sharp, unguarded gasp. Still, I didn't look toward Romy or Mom. I didn't need to. I could feel them frozen behind their walls of judgment. This time, it wasn't their approval I needed. It was my voice. The melody dipped low, pulling memories from places I hadn't touched in years. One note curled into the time I'd been laughed off stage in 8th grade after my hand cramped mid-performance. Another stretched into the night I watched Romy accept her music award while I sat silent, clapping from the back. There was the sound of Dad's voice, not speaking, just breathing. The way he used to when we practiced late into the night, the metronome ticking between us like a heartbeat. I remembered the way he'd rest his hand on mine to guide the stroke. Not correct, just guide. That memory stayed with me as I transitioned into the part of the piece I'd added myself. A quiet answer to everything unfinished, a line that didn't apologize, but insisted on being heard. I didn't know what it would feel like until I reached the final note. I held it longer than I meant to, as if I wasn't ready to let go. And when it faded, I let the bow drop, not with flair, but the way you close a door after walking through it. Silence. Not even the rustle of clothes or a program page turning. It was too long to be polite, too heavy to be empty. Then someone stood. I didn't see who at first, just the motion in my peripheral vision. Then another and another, feet shuffling, hands clapping, some slow, like they weren't sure what just happened, others faster, certain. I blinked, and suddenly the whole room was on its feet. Romy stayed seated, her mother too. But their faces weren't smug, they were still. Like they didn't know what to feel. Like the moment didn't leave room for their version of the story. Backstage was dim, cool. My palms were damp and the violin still hummed faintly with vibration as I lowered it into the case. I didn't know how long I stood there, just breathing. Ms. Grant? A man in a tailored navy coat, silver hair curling at the sides, waited by the hallway. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, stepping forward. "I'm Franklin Devens, dean at the Northridge Conservatory." I nodded, unsure what to say. He glanced behind him and motioned toward a young man, maybe 19, lean and soft-eyed, like someone not yet dulled by too much cynicism. "My son," the man said. "He cried during your performance." The young man didn't look embarrassed. He stepped forward and said simply, "Thank you for that." The dean reached into his pocket and handed me a card. "We'd be honored to have you audition. Full scholarship, if you're interested." My fingers curled around the card like it was something I wasn't allowed to hold. I haven't trained formally in years," I said, unsure. He smiled. "You trained in something much harder. Grace." The hallway cleared slowly after that, but a chill settled over me again as I turned the corner toward the front doors. A familiar voice cut through the quiet. "Melina." "Romy." Her tone wasn't sharp this time, just uncertain. Beside her, our mother stood with her purse clutched tightly, like she didn't know whether to defend or dismiss me. I didn't slow, didn't flinch. Mom's lips parted, maybe to offer some backhanded compliment, maybe to explain. But before she could say a word, I spoke. Quietly, clearly. "Let them see what strength sounds like." And I kept walking. Out of the hall, into the night. Not triumphant, just steady. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had something to prove. I had said everything I needed to say, without shouting. I thought the ovation was the end. I thought the applause would fade, and I'd slip back into the quiet. But that next morning, it was louder than anything I'd ever played. The light on my phone blinked like a stubborn heartbeat. I rolled over, still wrapped in the haze of the night before, and reached for it. Messages, missed calls, notifications piling up faster than I could swipe them away. At first, I braced myself for the usual. Someone digging up an old photo, a distant cousin asking for tickets they never showed interest in before, or worse, another opinion about my tone. But what blinked back from the screen wasn't criticism, it was fire. Violinist shakes room with raw honesty, performance goes viral. Someone in the crowd, just a stranger, had recorded my recital, a 2-minute clip of that aching, imperfect note I had held at the end, and somehow it had reached 1 million people overnight. The video was grainy, lit by the stage's dim glow, but it carried the moment. My moment. The silence. The standing ovation. I scrolled through the comments, not expecting much, but instead of mockery I found something else. She didn't just play the violin, she told the story of every girl who was told she wasn't enough. Another one read, "That bow was trembling, but she held it. I felt that." I don't know how long I stared at the screen. My coffee went cold beside me. And for the first time in a long time, my hands were still, not because they were afraid, but because they had said everything they needed to say. Around noon, just after I'd showered and managed to pull on the least wrinkled t-shirt I had, another buzz came in. Email. Subject line. Artist in Residence Program. Immediate response requested. It was from the dean's assistant. Not a newsletter, not a standard form, a direct offer, not just the full scholarship Maestro Callan had spoken of, but an invitation to mentor, to teach. "You won't just study," the message read. "You'll show others how to survive." I sat down, not in disbelief, but in release. For so long, every award Romy brought home had been framed. Every spotlight felt too hot for someone like me. But this moment? It was quiet, gentle, and mine. A few hours later, just as I was gathering my case to head out for a walk, I heard the knock, firm, too familiar. When I opened the door, Romy stood there, arms folded tight across her chest like a shield she'd forgotten how to lower. "So, now you're some martyr?" she said, scanning my face like it still held something she could twist. I didn't flinch, didn't ask her in. Instead, I turned back into the apartment and pulled out the envelope, the one with the printed version of the blog, all of it. My words, my memories, my truths, unedited. I handed it to her without ceremony. "I didn't write it for you," I said. She stared at the envelope like it might burn through her hand. "Then why send it?" "Because you need to understand. It was never about taking anything from you. That's what hurt you most, isn't it? That I didn't try to compete." Romy blinked. Just once. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. For the first time in my life, my sister had nothing to say. She turned and left without a word. No parting insult, no apology. Just the sound of heels fading down the hallway. The next morning, the conservatory campus looked different than I remembered it. Bigger, warmer somehow. I climbed the steps with my violin in hand, not tucked away this time but in full view. I had promised myself I'd walk through these doors when I felt ready. And now I wasn't just entering as a student. Near the top step, a little girl with a backpack too big for her frame darted toward me. "You're the violin girl," she grinned. "I saw you online." I smiled and knelt to her height. "Is that so?" She pulled a crumpled sheet of music from her folder. "Will you sign this?" I took the pencil she offered and wrote my name carefully in the margin. "What's your favorite piece?" I asked, handing it back. She shrugged. "I don't have one, yet." I laughed, soft and full. "Then let's write one together." That afternoon, I taught my first session. Just a few chairs, a few kids, and a circle of music stands in a sunlit room. No stage, no pressure, just possibilities. And for the first time in my life, the violin didn't feel like a weight. It felt like a bridge. I used to think silence was safety, that blending in would keep me from breaking. But I've learned, sometimes the loudest note you'll ever play is the one that finally belongs to you.